Wyoming Territory, 1883. The wind howled low over the broken grasslands outside Medicine Bow as the train pulled away, leaving only the sound of her child's cough and the weight of everything she had lost behind. Lorna Callahan stood with her back to the tracks, her threadbare coat pulled tight around her. In her arms, Daisy fidgeted and whimpered, and beside her, 8-year-old Daniel gripped her skirt, his face pale and drawn. She could not remember the last time they had slept in a real bed. Her fingers trembled as she brushed hair from Daniel's forehead. Every town they ran to, every job she took, it always ended the same. Someone took advantage, or someone got sick, or someone left. "I'm tired of loss," she whispered. The cold wind carried it, but the words dropped heavy in her chest. "You look like someone who needs a hand," came a calm voice behind her. She turned, startled. A tall man stepped out from beneath his broad-brimmed hat. Dust clung to his coat and boots, but his eyes were steady, warm. He looked strong, but not in that way men often used strength to hurt. His voice had a low, steady rhythm to it, like the hooves of a good horse. "I do not take charity," she said, stiffening. "I am not offering charity," he replied. "I am offering help. Name's Elias Vaughn. I run cattle a few miles north, was in town for supplies. Saw you standing here like you had nowhere to go." She hesitated. "I do not trust strangers. Fair, you got 2 children and no husband with you. I would not expect you to." At that moment, Daisy coughed again, a deep, scraping sound that rattled in her lungs. Lorna's heart clenched. "There's a fire and stew waiting at my camp. Just come warm up. You can leave after if that is what you want." Elias crouched to eye level with Daniel. "You like horses, son?" Daniel looked up at his mother. She nodded slowly. "He does." Elias stood and gestured toward his wagon. "Come on then." "Ain't far." The ride to his land was quiet except for the wind and the creak of the wagon. Lorna kept her eyes on the road ahead, one protective arm around Daisy. The girl had fallen asleep curled against her. Daniel sat up front with Elias, and for the first time in days, Lorna heard him laugh softly when Elias pointed out the hawks circling above the hills. Elias's cabin sat tucked against a line of cottonwoods by a creek. Smoke curled from the chimney, and the scent of stew drifted out the door before they even stepped inside. "Set her down there on the cot," Elias said, nodding to Daisy. "It is clean, fresh blankets. I sleep out in the barn most nights anyway." "You and the children can have the place." Lorna's brow furrowed. "Why would you do that for us?" "Because you look like you have not had a choice in a long time," Elias said simply. "Let me give you one." She did not know how to answer that, so she said nothing. But when he handed her a bowl of stew, she took it. When he showed Daniel where the horses were kept, she let him go, watching carefully but not stopping him. That night, for the first time in weeks, all 3 of them slept through the dark. The next morning, Elias made coffee and oatmeal. He had already been up for hours, chopping wood and tending to the animals. "You plan to move on soon?" he asked, handing Lorna her cup. She sat on the porch steps, fingers curled around the tin mug. "I do not know. I do not have anywhere else to go." "You do now," he said. "If you want it," she watched him. "Why?" Elias leaned against the post. "Because I have been alone a long time too. My brother died in the war. Parents passed a year after. I built this place with my own hands, but it is quiet, too quiet. I would not mind some laughter in the barn again. Someone to cook for besides myself. Someone who needs what I have too much of." Lorna blinked, eyes stinging. "You do not know me. I know you are trying to keep your children safe. That is enough." Later that day, while Daisy napped, Lorna helped Elias mend a broken fence. She worked silently, sleeves rolled up, sun warming her cheeks. He watched her from a few paces away, not saying much, just offering tools when needed. "You work hard," he said. "I had to learn. No one else was going to do it for me." "Well, you do not have to do it alone anymore," Elias said gently. She looked up at him, eyes meeting. Something shifted between them, not sudden, not loud, just a quiet understanding. Over the next few weeks they stayed. Lorna began making meals in the kitchen, brushing dust from shelves, humming softly when she thought no one was listening. Daisy's cough faded. Daniel followed Elias everywhere, asking questions about cattle, rope knots, and how to ride. One evening, the four of them sat around the fire pit outside. Elias handed Lorna a plate of cornbread and beans, then leaned in, voice low. "Back in town, you said you were tired of loss." She nodded, eyes on the fire. "Well," he said, "then let me give you years of gain." She looked at him, really looked, and something inside her unlatched. The ache in her chest loosened. "You really mean that?" "I do. I do not offer words I do not plan to live by." She reached for his hand. He took it, strong and steady. Daniel grinned from where he sat with Daisy, poking the fire with a stick. Lorna did not say another word. She just leaned her head against Elias's shoulder, and for the first time in a long time, she let herself believe this might be the start of something good. The first snow came quiet, blanketing the ridgeline in a hush that settled deep into the land. Elias had seen a dozen winters rise up like this, but this was the first where someone waited at the window when he returned from the pasture. Lorna stood just inside the door as he came in, brushing snow from his shoulders. Her hands moved without hesitation now, fingers steady as she took his gloves and laid them near the stove. Behind her, Daisy sat with a piece of muslin, trying to stitch crooked loops under Daniel's instruction. The boy's voice had taken on a new shape, less wary, more sure. "You were out longer than usual," Lorna said, not accusing, just observing. "Had to bring the herd down closer to the creek. Storms coming. The sky's too still for comfort." She nodded once and turned back to the kettle. The scent of boiled root vegetables and salt pork lifted into the warm air. Elias hung his coat and stepped out of his boots, then crouched beside Daisy. "Your stitches are tighter than mine ever were," he said. Daisy grinned, missing a front tooth now. "Mama says I got small hands for thread. That's a blessing." "Cattle don't care for fine work." Daniel laughed, low and pleased with himself. "She's been teaching me too. I'm not as good." "You will be," Elias said. "You've already got the patience." After supper, when the children were settled on the cot with their feet tucked beneath the quilt, Lorna stood at the table sorting dried herbs into small muslin pouches. Her movements were thoughtful, practiced. Elias leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "You know your plants," he said. "I grew up with a grandmother who didn't trust town doctors. She taught me what kept fevers down and stomachs quiet." She looked up. "I could make salves for the horses if you want." "I do," he said without hesitation. She went back to her sorting, but her voice softened. "I never told you where we came from. You don't have to. I want to." Elias stayed quiet, waiting. "My husband was a railway man. He died outside Laramie 3 winters ago. One of the lines collapsed under him. They said it was quick. But quick doesn't mean easy. After that, we moved town to town. I took any work I could, sewing, cleaning, nursing when it was needed, but something always came undone." Elias didn't step closer, but she felt his steadiness anyway. "You've held it all together," he said. "Even when the seams were fraying. I've had to, you don't now." Lorna looked over at the children. Daisy had buried her face into Daniel's shoulder. He patted her back, eyes already closed. "I don't know how to stop bracing for the next break," she said. "You don't have to stop all at once. Just lean a little." For a long time she didn't answer. Then, quieter than before, she said, "You're not like most men I've met. I'm not trying to be." She folded the last pouch, tied it tight, and set it with the others. Then she turned and met his eyes. "Did you always plan to live alone out here?" "No," he said. "I thought I'd build it first, then find someone who'd want it too, but time kept passing, and I stopped looking. Until I saw you." Lorna's breath caught, not from shock, but from something gentler. She stepped toward him, slow, watching his face the whole way. "If I stay," she said, "I'd need to do more than cook and tend to wounds. I'd need to matter." "You already do." His voice didn't waver. "Not because of what you do, but because of who you are." She rested a hand against his chest, not to push him away, just to feel the rhythm there, strong and quiet. "I think I'd like to lean," she whispered. He covered her hand with his, warm and calloused. "You don't have to carry all the weight anymore." Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and slow. Inside, the fire burned low and steady, and for the first time in years, Lorna felt the shape of something lasting press into her chest, not fear, not dread, but a slow, honest warmth. By late January, the days leaned longer, though the cold held tight to the earth. Elias brought down extra hay from the loft, while Lorna lined the shelves with dried yarrow and horehound, her fingers red from the cold but nimble. The children spent afternoons in the loft, where the air was warmer and the light spilled in golden through the slats. Daniel practiced whittling, and Daisy had taken to humming tunelessly while she played with the rag doll Lorna had sewn from scraps of Elias's old shirt. One morning, Lorna stepped out to the barn before dawn, her shawl pulled snug around her shoulders. Elias stood already at the gate, steam lifting from the backs of the cattle. He glanced over as she approached, then passed her the tin cup he'd been holding. "It's strong," he said. "Didn't want it going cold," she sipped. "Stronger than I expected." He watched her a moment. "You've been rising earlier lately." "I sleep better now. Don't wake with my jaw clenched so tight." Elias nodded and leaned his forearms on the gate. "Storm last week brought a pair of downed trees near the west line. I'll need to clear them before they rot into the fence." "I can help." He turned toward her, surprised but not dismissive. "You ever swung an axe?" "No," she said. "But I can learn." They walked the half-mile together, boots crunching through crusted snow. The trees had fallen with their roots exposed, bark torn where the wind had pushed them down. Elias handed her a smaller axe and showed her where to strike. She tested the weight, adjusted her grip, then began. "You take to it well," he said after her third clean swing. "I'm tired of watching life happen from the side," she said. They worked in rhythm, the sound of their blades echoing off the low hills. When they paused to rest, Elias handed her a strip of dried venison from his coat pocket. "How many cattle do you run in spring?" she asked, chewing slowly. "About 50 head. Could handle more, but it's just been me." "Keeping them healthy through winter's always the test. Would you ever expand?" she asked. "If I had help I could trust," he said. "Someone who knows the land's not just a resource, it's a partner." Lorna looked out across the flat stretch of snow-covered pasture. "I've never known land to be called that. My father used to say if you treat the land like it's yours, it'll leave you. But if you treat it like you belong to it, it'll carry you through." She didn't reply, but her eyes stayed on the horizon, and Elias watched her take the words in like a seed being pressed into soil. That night, after the children were asleep and the fire had dimmed to a red glow, Elias stood by the table, unrolling a map he'd kept folded in a drawer for years. Lorna came up beside him, tying her braid over one shoulder. "I marked out where the soil's soft enough for a second garden," he said. "If we turned the shed into a smokehouse, we could carry more meat through next winter." Her hand brushed the edge of the map. "Would you want to do all that? Not alone." Elias looked at her, waiting. Lorna's voice was quiet. "I've started to think of this place as mine too." His face didn't change, but his hand moved, slow and deliberate, until it rested over hers. Not a question, not a demand, just contact. "I don't know what comes next," she said, "but I'm not afraid of it, not here. We'll build it," he said. Bit by bit, nothing rushed. She looked up at him. "What if I don't know how to be part of something steady?" "You're doing it already," he said. The next morning, she found Daniel feeding the chickens without being asked. Daisy had lined up a row of small stones along the porch rail, humming as she counted them aloud. Lorna stood in the doorway, the smell of corn mush warming behind her, and watched the life she hadn't known how to imagine begin to settle around her like the snow on the pines, quiet, certain, and exactly where it belonged. By early March, the thaw had begun. Not in full, just enough that water pooled along the edges of the pasture, and the creek ran faster, louder. The horses started shedding their winter coats, and Elias let the cattle graze further out, where the snow had receded into patchy wet ground. Lorna stood by the open barn doors as the light stretched longer across the hills. Mud clung to the hem of her work dress, and her hands bore the scratches of bramble pulled from the garden beds. She pressed a palm to her lower back and exhaled slowly. "You've been out here since sunup," Elias said as he stepped inside, brushing sawdust from his sleeves. "I wanted to see if the soil was loosening around the roots. I can't plant yet, but I can start turning the ground." He tilted his head. "You always this stubborn with seasons?" "I'm not stubborn," she said, her eyes narrowed just slightly. "I'm impatient in early spring," Elias chuckled. "Well, it's honest at least." She stepped inside the barn, the air still holding winter's chill. "I've been thinking about the root cellar. It's too shallow. If we dig it deeper, pack the walls with straw and clay, we could store enough to get through next winter easy." "You planning to stay through next winter then?" he asked. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stepped closer to where he stood by the tack wall. "I've lived in enough places to know when one fits. This one fits." Elias lifted a hand and brushed a bit of straw from her sleeve. "I've been hoping you'd say that without me having to ask." "I don't want to be asked," she said. "I want to choose." He nodded once. "Then I'm glad you're choosing this." A silence settled between them, not heavy, not awkward, just full. That evening, the children helped carry buckets to the chicken coop, their boots soaked through and faces flushed from wind. Daniel had started carving initials into the low posts along the fence, careful and slow, keeping each one aligned. Daisy followed behind, tying bits of blue thread to the same posts. "They say it keeps the wind spirits happy," she told Lorna when asked. "Where'd you hear that?" Daniel said it. "Said maybe this place won't blow us away if we say thank you." Later, after supper, Elias sat near the hearth with an old ledger open across his knees. Lorna dried her hands on her apron and crossed the room. "You keep records?" "For every head, every sale, every loss," he said. "Been doing it since my father showed me how." She leaned over his shoulder. "You ever think of teaching Daniel the same?" "I thought I'd wait to see if he wanted it." "He tried copying your brand in the dirt today, got the angle of the V almost right." Elias gave a slow nod. "Then I'll ask him tomorrow." As she turned to sit across from him, he looked up. "You ever think of marrying again?" he said, voice even. She stilled. "I didn't think I'd want to. But now, I think I'd want something that doesn't have to be named to be real. But if it helps settle the land or the children or you, then yes, I'd marry you." Elias stood, closing the ledger gently. He crossed the room and took her hand, not like a question, but like he already knew the answer. He didn't speak right away. He just looked at her with that same quiet steadiness he'd offered the first day they met. "I'd marry you because I want to," he said. "Not to fix anything, not to settle, just to build something the right way." She nodded once. "Then let's do it right." They didn't speak of it again that night. There was no need. Instead, they moved like they had every evening, clearing the table, checking the fire, making sure the children were warm. But in the smallest gestures in the way, Elias touched her back as she passed, or how she lingered beside him before climbing into bed, there was something new. Not sudden, not loud, just sure. The thaw deepened in the days that followed. The creek ran higher and the pasture took on color again. The smell of damp earth drifted in through the windows. Lorna began marking rows with twine, and Elias cut new fence posts in the shed. And one morning, with the barn doors open and the tools laid out for the day, Elias looked over and said, "There's a traveling preacher stopping in town next week. Folks say he does simple unions, no fuss." Lorna didn't look up from where she knelt, trimming the edge of a seed row. "No fuss sounds fine. I'll ride out and speak with him then." "All right." She stood, brushing dirt from her skirt. He wiped his hands and walked to where she stood. "They didn't touch. They didn't need to, you sure?" he asked. "I've never been more," Elias nodded. "Then we'll make it official, and then we'll get back to planting." She smiled, not wide, not bright, but deep. The kind that settled behind the ribs and stayed, the kind that came only after long winters and longer silences, and the land, listening, seemed to ease beneath their feet. The preacher arrived on a Thursday, just after midday, his wagon kicking up dust as it rolled into the clearing behind the house. Elias had met him half a mile out and guided him the rest of the way, the two men speaking little beyond what was needed. Lorna had set a basin of warm water on the table and laid out her second-best dress, the one with the clean hem and the blue stitching at the cuffs. Daisy pressed wildflowers between pages of the ledger the night before, and Daniel had swept the porch twice that morning without being asked. The sky was clear, the kind of blue that stretched wide and silent. No guests had been invited, no music played, but the stillness held a kind of reverence. "You sure you want to wear that apron?" Elias asked as he stepped inside. His shirt was clean, tucked neat into his best trousers. She hadn't seen him smooth his hair like that before. Lorna looked down at her hands. "I'll take it off once the stew's on. I don't see the point in pretending I'm not going to tend the fire soon as it's done." He nodded, then walked over and held her gaze. "Do I look nervous?" she asked. "No." "You look like you've come to stay." The preacher stood under the cottonwood by the barn, Bible in hand, hat held respectfully at his chest. The children stood close by, Daisy clutching the doll Lorna had stitched from the old shirt, Daniel's hands clasped tight behind his back. Their eyes were fixed on Elias and Lorna, but neither interrupted. The preacher's words were brief, his voice steady. When he asked if they'd take one another as husband and wife, neither hesitated. Elias's voice was low and certain. "I do." Lorna's hand didn't tremble when she took his. "I do." No rings were exchanged. None had been asked for. Instead, they pressed their foreheads together for a moment, eyes closed, the kind of closeness that didn't need to be seen to be known. The preacher offered a quiet blessing and stepped back. Daniel let out a breath that sounded like relief, and Daisy clapped once before looking around to see if it was allowed. Lorna turned toward the children. "Come help me with the stew. You promised you'd peel the carrots." Daniel followed her in with a grin, and Daisy ran ahead to open the door. Elias lingered by the tree, watching the house with a look that spoke of long roads finally come to rest. That night they ate by lamplight, the table pulled close to the hearth. The stew had simmered all afternoon, the bread was warm, and the butter had been churned that morning. When they finished eating, Elias pushed his chair back and reached for Lorna's hand beneath the table. "I've got something for you," he said. "Wasn't sure if it was needed, but I wanted you to have it." He stood, crossed to the shelf by the window, and returned with a small box carved from pine. He passed it to her and sat again, watching her face. She opened it slowly. Inside was a brooch, shaped like a sprig of sage, carved from bone and polished smooth. The clasp was simple but firm. "My mother wore it when she married my father," he said. "It's the one thing I kept after the house went. I thought it should belong to the one who keeps this home now." Lorna touched the brooch with careful fingers. "I'll wear it when I go into town, so folks know I have something that can't be taken." "You've got more than that," he said, his voice quiet. "I know," she replied, and leaned close enough that her forehead touched his again, just like under the tree. In the weeks that followed, the land woke fully to spring. The garden rose, filled with young shoots. The hens laid regular, and the bees began to stir in the hollow box behind the shed. Lorna planted marigolds along the path, and Daisy carried water to them every morning in a tin cup. Daniel took to riding with Elias during the midday check on the herd, asking fewer questions now and doing more with his hands. The house changed in small ways, a second coat hook by the door, a tablecloth stitched from old flour sacks, a new shelf built by the window for the children's books. Lorna read aloud in the evening sometimes, her voice low, the children curled up with their feet tucked beneath them. Elias listened with his eyes closed, not asleep, but resting in the sound of it. One night, as the creek ran high with meltwater and the moon hung full above the pasture, Lorna stepped outside with a shawl drawn around her shoulders. Elias joined her a moment later, his hand finding hers without a word. "You ever think about the land beyond that ridge?" she asked. "I used to. Still want to go see it." He looked at her, then out over the fields where the cattle slept and the house stood warm behind them. "No," he said. "Everything I want is right here." Her hand tightened in his, and she leaned her head against his arm. The wind moved softly through the grass, and the stars held steady. Inside, the children slept, the fire banked low. And out there in the quiet, beneath the weight of all they'd survived and everything they'd chosen, Elias and Lorna stood together, no longer braced against the world but rooted in it, in each other. In peace, they never left that land, never needed to. Years later, Daniel would carve a new gatepost with the family's brand, and Daisy would paint the barn door sky blue, because she said it reminded her of that day under the cottonwood. And every spring, Lorna would pin the sage brooch to her dress and walk the rows of the garden, Elias beside her, his hand in hers. The silence between them full and certain. Their life was not grand, it was steady, and it was good.